Hello, everybody. We are going to read chapter 8 of Owls in the Family, and I have my little friends Wool and Weeps with me today. Boys and girls, there are parts of this chapter that I am going to skip over a little bit. So if what I say is a little bit different than what's in your book, that's okay. So follow along as best you can. Chapter 8. The banks of the Saskatchewan River were very steep, where the river ran through the prairie to the south of Saskatoon. And about 2 miles downstream from the city was a perfect place for digging caves. Bruce and Murray and I had our summer headquarters down there in an old cave some hobos had dug a long time ago. They had fixed it up with logs and pieces of wood so it wouldn't collapse. You have to be careful of caves because they don't have good strong logs to hold up the roof. The whole thing can fall down and kill you. This was a good cave we had, though. My dad had even come and looked it over to make sure it was safe for us. It had a door made out of a piece of tin roofing, and there was a smokestack going up through the ceiling. Inside was sort of a bench where you could lay down, and we had 2 old butter crates for chairs. We had put dry hay down on the floor for a carpet, and under the hay was a secret hole where we could hide about anything that was valuable. I bet you've built a fort before, or maybe a cave in the snow or something. I just wonder if you could imagine in your head what this cave looked like. Maybe even draw a picture of it. The river ran only a hop, skip, and a jump from the door of the cave. There was a big sandbar close by, which made a backwater where the current was slow enough for swimming. Standing right beside the swimming hole was the biggest cottonwood tree in the whole of Saskatchewan. One of its branches stuck straight out of the water, and there were marks in it where a rope had cut into the bark. We used to go up to our cave a couple of times a week during the summer holidays, and usually we took the owls along. Wool had learned how to ride on the handlebars of my bicycle, but Weeps couldn't keep his balance there, so we built a box for him and tied it to the carrier behind the seat. Hey, that kind of looks like the picture on the front cover of our book. Mutt and Rex used to come too, chasing cows whenever they got a chance or racing away across the prairie after jackrabbits. We would bike to the end of 3rd Avenue and then along an old trail that ran on top of the riverbank. When we got close to the cave, we would hide our bikes in the willows and then climb down the banks and follow a secret path. There were some pretty tough kids in Saskatoon, and we didn't want them to find our cave if we could help it. Wool loved those trips. All the way out, he would bounce up and down on my handlebars, hooting to himself with excitement or hooting out insults to a passing dog. When we came to a place where we hid the bikes, he would fly into the poplars and follow us through the tops of the trees. He usually stayed pretty close, though, because if he didn't, some crows would be sure to spot him, and then they would call up all the other crows for miles around and they would try to mob him. When that happened, he would come zooming down to the cave and bang on the door with his beak until we let him in. He wasn't afraid of the crows. It was just that he couldn't fight back when they tormented him. As for Weeps, he usually stayed close to the cave, where he felt nice and safe. One summer afternoon, when we were at the cave, we decided to go for a swim. The 3 of us shucked off our clothes and raced down to the sandbar and hollered at each other. In half a minute, we were in the water, splashing around and rolling in the slippery black mud along the edge of the sandbar. It was great stuff to fight with. Nice and soft and slithery, we packed it into nice little mud balls that made a wonderful splash when they hit something. Have you ever done that at the beach? You made like a sand mud ball and maybe you threw it at somebody? Whenever we went swimming, Wool would come along and find a perch in a tree where he could watch and have fun. He would get out on a big limb that hung over the water, and the more fuss and noise we made, the more excited he became. He would walk back and forth across the limb, hoo-hoo-hooing, and ruffling his feathers, and you could tell that he felt he was missing out on all the fun. This particular day, he couldn't stand it any longer. He came down from the tree and waddled right over to the water's edge. We were skylarking on the sandbar when I saw him, so I gave him a yell. "Hey, Wool, come here! Come on, old owl, come on out here!" Of course, I thought he would fly over the strip of open water and light on the dry sand where we were playing. But I forgot Wool had never had any experience with water before, except for drinking from his bowl at home. He got his experience in a hurry. Instead of spreading his wings, he lifted up one foot very deliberately and started to walk across the water towards us. Well, it didn't take him very long to figure out that he couldn't do it. There was an almighty splash, and splay flew in every which way, and by the time we raced across and fished him out, he was half drowned, and about the sickest-looking bird you ever saw. His feathers were plastered down until he looked as skinny as a plucked chicken. The slimy black mud hadn't improved his looks much either. I carried him ashore, and he didn't even think to thank me for it. His feelings were hurt worse than he was, and after he had shaken most of the water out of his feathers, he went galloping off through the woods towards home on foot. He was too wet to fly, without a backwards glance. Towards the middle of July, Bruce and I got permission from our parents to spend the night in the cave. Murray couldn't come because his mother wouldn't let him. We took Wool and Weeps with us, and of course, we both had dogs. Boys and girls, when I was a kid, we played so much differently than how you play now. I remember in the summertime, my sister and I would take our bicycles out. We would go riding, and we would ride into a cornfield, and we would play with whoever we could find. And we wouldn't even go home until the street lights went on. That was our secret signal to go home. Now I know play has even changed so much since then. So I think about these boys, and I think about Billy and Bruce finding a cave near a river and hanging out in this cave and playing there and swimming in a river, all of this without their parents with them. That was a really long time ago. I wonder if you could have a conversation with your mom and dad about how they used to play when they were younger, and maybe how their parents used to play when they were younger, and how it's really changed from how you play today. Continuing on, I am on page 77, second paragraph. In the afternoon, we went for a hike over the prairie looking for birds. Mutt, who was running ahead of us, flushed a prairie chicken off of her nest. There were 10 eggs in the nest, and they were just hatching out. We sat down beside the nest and watched. In an hour's time, 7 of the little chickens had hatched right before our eyes. It was pretty exciting to see, and Wool seemed just as curious about it as we were. Then all of a sudden, 3 of the newly hatched little birds slipped out off the nest and scuttled straight for Wool. Before he could move, they were underneath him, crowding against his big feet, peep, peep, peeping happily. I guess they thought that he was their mother, because they hadn't seen their real mother yet. Wool was so surprised he didn't know what to do. He kept lifting up one foot and then the other foot, just to shake off the little ones. When the other 4 babies joined the first 3, Wool began to get nervous. But finally he seemed to resign himself to being a mother, and he fluffed his feathers out and lowered himself very gently to the ground. Bruce and I nearly died laughing. The sight of the baby prairie chickens popping their heads out through Wool's feathers, and that great big beak of his snapping anxiously in the air right over their heads, it was the silliest thing I've ever seen. I guess Wool knew it was silly too, but he couldn't figure out how to get out of the mess he was in. He kept looking at me as if to say, "For heaven's sakes, do something!" I don't know how long he would have stayed there, but we began to worry that the real mother might not find her chicks. So I finally lifted him up and put him on my shoulder, and we went back to the cave to have some supper. We had a good laugh at Wool, though, but he had the laugh on us before the day was done. After we had eaten, we decided to go down to the river bank and wait for the sun to set. A pair of coyotes lived on the opposite bank of the river, and every evening at sunset, one of them would climb a little hill and sit there howling. It was a scary sound, but we liked it because it made us feel as if this was the olden times, and the prairie belonged to just us, and to the buffaloes, and to the prairie wolves, and to the First Nations. Wool was sitting in the tree, and Rex and Mutt had gone off somewhere on a hunting trip of their own. It was growing dusk when we heard a lot of crashing in the trees behind us. We turned around just as two big kids came into sight. They were two of the toughest kids in Saskatoon. If they hadn't come on us so suddenly, we would have been running before they ever saw us. But now it was too late to run. They would have caught us before we could go 10 feet. The only thing we could do was sit where we were and hope they would leave us alone. What a hope that was. They came right on over, and one of them reached down and grabbed Bruce and started to twist his arm behind his back. "Listen, you little rats," he said. "We heard you got a cave someplace down here. You're too young to own a cave, so we're taking over. Show us where it is, or I'll twist your arm right off." The other big kid made a grab for me, but I slipped past him and just started running when he stuck his foot out and tripped me. And then he sat on me. "Say, Joe," he said to his pal, "I got an idea. Either these kids tell us where the cave is, or we tie them to a tree and leave them there." Just then the coyote across the river gave a howl. Can you howl like a coyote? All four of us jumped a little. All that talk about ghosts, but Joe said, "That ain't nothing, just a coyote howling. You gonna tell us, kid, or we gonna tie you to a tree?" Bruce and I knew they were only trying to scare us, but we were scared all right. I was just opening my mouth to tell them where the cave was when Wool took a hand in things. He had been sitting in the big limb of the tree, and since it was almost dark by then, he looked like a big white blob up there. I don't think he'd been paying much attention to what was happening on the ground below him. But when that coyote howled, he must have thought it was some kind of a challenge. He opened his beak and he gave a huge howling scream, an owl hunting scream. Have you ever heard a horned owl scream? Usually they do it at night to scare any mice or rabbits that happen to be hiding near into jumping or running. Then the owl swoops down and grabs them. If you've ever heard an owl scream, you know it's just about the most scary sound in the world. When Wool cut loose, it made my skin creep, and I knew what it was, but the two big kids didn't know. Their heads jerked up, and then they saw the ghostly white shape that was Wool in the tree. And then they were off running. They went right through the poplar woods like a couple of charging buffaloes, and we could still hear them breaking bush when they were half a mile away. My guess is that they ran all the way to Saskatoon. When they were out of hearing, Bruce stood up and began rubbing his arm. And then he looked at Wool. "Boy," he said, "you sure scared those two roughnecks silly. But did you have to scare me out of my skin too?" "Hoo-hoo-hoo! Wool chuckled as he floated down out of the tree and lit upon my shoulder.